So over the weekend, if no one saw, maybe you can guess it based on the price action in the chart, is the Strait of Hormuz. I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but what the news is constantly talking about closed back down, and we got a nice gap actually to essentially just fill this big run up we had on Friday. So that's kind of an interesting spot in terms of just overall healthy price action to essentially come down to, I would say, this previous high right here and kind of where this kind of liftoff took place. Um, and so, big gap down, and it looks like at the moment we're kind of just chugging higher. I would assume maybe we'll kind of come up here, fill this gaps, and then decide if the market wants to go up or down from there, depending on probably how the news unfolds and this week unfolds in the Middle East. Just because, again, that is a massive driver right now. Just to kind of look at the big picture is the S&P 500 on a daily chart has pretty much recovered this crazy V bottom sell-off we had from all that damage in the Middle East, which is very interesting. The fact that that's how strong the market is. And then looking at the NASDAQ as well, Friday, we pretty much tested all-time highs, and we're still making a run at it. And the fact that even with oil, oil's recovered a little bit from Friday's lows, but it's still kind of in a downtrend here. So I think price-wise, it seems like this initial shock is trying to wear off, but it remains to be seen, depending on what happens in the Middle East, how this plays out. This is a great spot for a double bottom. In oil, we could just chop and stay at this area for a while because there's just so much unknown in the market. So I think that's something to pay attention to. And it's going to be really interesting to see, how does this unfold? Do we just how far do we continue higher, and do we chop for a while above all-time highs? Do we sell off a little bit? Because we're really overextended on a daily chart on pretty much most major indexes from this reversal. And so in terms of big picture, what I'm looking for, I think it's, on the NASDAQ here on a 15-minute. Just looking at this, we're still in such a massive, there's not really a great trend line that necessarily fits it. Maybe on the upside. And maybe I can find a channel that fits this somehow, but it's pretty much broken a little bit, but we're still in this big trend. And I think the question is here, is this now going to start slowing down and going sideways, and this big uptrend is broken? Or are we, going to make a lower high and start a trend down? Or are we just going to continue higher? And that was just a little news freak out that aligned with the all-time highs very well, because the S&P 500 here on a 15-minute chart has pretty much come to price action wise, this looks pretty clean. It's come up to all-time highs, got a little overexcited, pulled back, but then it's just kind of bouncing. So I think I don't have a big bias either direction at the moment. I think we could go either way. And so I think it's Monday after, a big move. I think it's kind of need to see how things kind of play out today. I definitely want to mark the all-time highs on the S&P 500 for a resistance zone. I also actually want to mark the Friday. This is Friday's close where the market closed essentially before the news popped and it had this huge gap. Potential, we just fill this gap. It kind of looks like we're just slowly looking to fill that gap. And then we might hit that and sell off. That's definitely a resistance spot potential. And then, I mean, down here, this is just all-time highs resistance and kind of where this bottomed. You know, maybe if we start selling off, we can see if this little double bottom, the market might just pull back a little bit and reverse off of that. So I'm just going to make kind of similar drawings on the NASDAQ just because it's very, very correlated. And I'm pretty much just looking to see where the major zones are for reversals, because those are where I like to look for potential trades. This high here matches pretty good with the close on Friday. And then going into a 1 minute. There's nothing really crazy, like super different to look at on a 1 minute. You know, maybe we have a small uptrend here, but I'm sure that'll be broken by the time the market actually gets up there, if it does. What do you guys think this morning's going to bring? Sideways or down? What does filling the gap exactly mean? So essentially, this is a great example. I'll actually remove. So I have a fair value gap indicator that shows this massive red box. It basically shows you where the gaps are. But if I remove it here for a second to just make it easy to see, is on Friday, the market closed right here, and then no one could trade until Sunday afternoon. And so when it reopened, because the news came out, it opened all the way technically here. And so there's this big gap in price movement versus, you know, like this, where the market's able to move and the prices and the market's open. And so this gap makes a huge void in price and price trading at that at those levels. And so often those gaps, the market likes to essentially fill them, and fill them means if it opens down here, it likes to go all the way up here and essentially recover and have price at some point trade this whole gap. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen right now, today, or, you know, this next time the market opens. It could take a while, but they're good magnets to look for in the market. And so you can just, on pretty much any brokerage, you can find a fair value gap indicator, and it will easily show those for you. One more thing before I look at a couple questions is we need to look at some news, actually. Just make sure what news is coming out today. Oh, wow. Okay. Don't see this very often. Today is Monday. Sometimes I just look at this next green arrow and I would have thought there was a lot of news, but Monday, it literally has no economic news. So there's no economic news today, which is kind of nice, but that could also mean, actually, if I bring that up again, the news tomorrow is pretty big pre-market news. And then this is pretty big market news too. I actually don't exactly know what this is on. The Fed chairman testifying. But this can sometimes give an impact. Definitely tomorrow, I'll look into that a little bit more of what that is. Because this can definitely cause some impact on the market. But that's all tomorrow, so I don't know if we'll see much. But that, you know, that stuff's not really going to affect today. I don't think it's big enough to just make us go sideways either. I think at the moment, you know, it's kind of just see how, because the market, even though futures are open since yesterday and they've done some stuff, the actual market and big funds and shock from the weekend news hasn't actually hit the market yet in a lot of ways, because not everyone trades pre-market with futures. A lot of money, and most of the money in the market, trades when the actual New York Stock Exchange is open, and that hasn't opened yet today. That opens at 9:30, and so we might see some volatility at the open. And so I think that's, hopefully that happens and we can potentially get a trade from it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. We got a couple minutes to wait here before the market opens. And you do need to subscribe to ask questions. I see kind of an uptrend here. Just trying to see if there's any like other little spots in the market. Going into this week, I want to try and be a little bit more engaged for an aggressive reading into kind of what I'm seeing in the market. As I get more and more used to streaming and more comfortable, I haven't been taking that many trades, but my reads and intuition about what's going on has been very good. And so I just need to get more comfortable actually executing on it. And that just takes time. That's just how trading is. It's always a growth game. And so that's kind of what I'm working on right now with my trading, is still focusing on just reversals and really good ones, but trying to expand a little bit on what that is. NASDAQ has also been more volatile recently. And I think the trades have actually been better on the NASDAQ. So I might be looking at that to execute on that potentially a little bit more. But, it totally depends how it sets up in real time. Can I see a potential pin? I'm assuming, I don't think so, based on I think of what you mean. I don't think the market's going to kind of sit here and chop and sit at a certain price. We're already in such a massive short squeeze on the big picture. I think the question is, when does this short squeeze kind of come to an end and we have a little bit of a sell-off from that? Definitely looks like we're going towards retesting the highs, and filling this gap. We could totally just launch up here pretty quick at the open, and then from there, the market could decide what it wants to do. I hope everyone had a good weekend. It's definitely important to try and reset over the weekend and not. I try and not think about trading on the weekend, because it's good to detach from it. It makes it easier to come back fully reset versus really getting hung up potentially on what happened last week, if last week was frustrating. You could maybe make a steeper trend line on this 1 minute, but I'm happy with kind of looking at this one. I think the super steep one is probably going to get broken in the first couple minutes anyway. Would I trade a continuation? I wouldn't necessarily trade a continuation, but if there's a pullback in the uptrend, that's definitely, I saw a couple of those last week that, in hindsight, I kind of want to be looking to take some of those. But the process of starting to do that is I want to be slow about it. I don't want to just, it's very easy to see a pattern in the market work out a couple of times, and then you get confirmation bias essentially of, oh, well, I've seen this happen, twice in the last week. That means I should start taking it every time, and that's not necessarily true. That's not a long enough period to essentially prove that something works. I don't really buy or sell based on the bid. I pretty much just get in on a market order because I trade big enough swings that I don't care about 1 or 2 ticks of slippage. What time frame am I using? I'm trading the S&P 500 futures here, which is the ticker is the ES, and then it's on a 1 minute chart. That's usually what I like to enter in on, with my stop and risk, and I like to target about 1,500 of risk per trade, and I like to usually go for 2 or 3 times my risk. I ideally like to look for reversals at kind of a support zone. That's what this is. And then something like a double bottom, basically some simple reversal patterns. And then also I look at the NASDAQ futures on a 1 minute chart. So the market's actually open here. But I also look at the big picture. So for everyone else just coming in, welcome. Please like the stream so we can kind of get it to more people. Big picture, what I'm looking at today is the S&P 500 futures on a 15-minute chart. Big picture is this is all-time highs. So on Friday, we made new all-time highs. Over the weekend, we had news from the Middle East where we gapped lower. And then we're kind of it looks like we're just going to fill this gap. This big, essentially, jump down in price from the market being closed and reopening. It looks like we're just going to at least retest this. So I'm looking to see, okay, the Friday's close right here. Is that a spot where we're going to reverse off of and we can get a trade and start a trend down? Or does the market just not care about the Middle East news enough and think that, okay, the big scare of a huge escalation in the Middle East is gone, and the Middle East and the US and whatever's going on, like, it's just going to go back and forth like it has for last week, and the market's kind of like, that's not a big enough issue for us to actually sell off. The market's strong enough that it wants to continue higher. NASDAQ is very, very similar, but it actually hasn't made new highs. I think it barely made new highs, but it's basically the same thing. And actually, if we look at the NASDAQ on a 1 minute chart, it might have actually just filled that gap. So the gap is essentially right here. We just missed filling the gap on the NASDAQ at the open. So the actual market closed right here for the NASDAQ, but we are opening and the NASDAQ's having a big kind of whip, and the ES, which has been less volatile recently, looks like it's kind of just chopping here a little bit. I usually like to give the market the first kind of 10 minutes to kind of see what it does, because it it usually, like here on the NASDAQ, it can have big swings like this in the first 15 minutes, because especially because the market's been closed for the last couple of days and there was a big gap, and so a lot of people are probably potentially caught on the wrong side of things. Now granted, if you look at this, and the market opened up here, we didn't actually open that much down. So even though the market traded all the way down here, when the market finally opened, we actually just gapped like this. So that's actually not that big of a gap. And so that's important to keep in mind, that there's not actually that many people down a ton of money. And so I don't think that's going to cause people to feel like they need to exit their positions. At this point, the market looks like it's just going to recover. I think people would just probably hold, assuming that we're going to continue the uptrend that we have for the last, I don't know, 2 weeks at this point. I don't know what week we're on at this point. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Let me know if you guys have any questions on that. And as well, if you're new, and I don't get to your questions or I don't explain it enough, I have a ton of very polished YouTube videos that go into a lot of this and explain futures. Wow, thanks for that donation. That is really nice of you. I definitely don't expect any of that, but that is very nice. I appreciate you guys being here. And we'll see what the market brings this week. It's very we've got exciting times in the market, even if it's not necessarily tradable sometimes and very hard to predict. It's definitely very interesting. I'm not going to deny that. Looking at just like the volatility wise, we are, let's see, this candlestick, just to try and keep track of this candlestick was like 7 points here. And the opening swing was kind of 10 points. So that's pretty big swing. NASDAQ here had that spike down, but it looks like it's recovering. I don't think I'd look for a reversal right here on the NASDAQ. I think at this point I'd want it to come up to more, test the all-time highs, because it's already pretty much there. But that would most likely, if the NASDAQ came up to the all-time highs, it would align up with the S&P 500 futures coming up to, 71.65. So the platform I'm using is called NinjaTrader. It's mainly futures focused. I've used it for like 6 years at this point. I think it's really good, really simple. Am I using the lifetime access? Yes, but I also got it like 6 years ago when it was like $700 or $800. Now it's definitely, I think, double that almost. I think it comes down to if it's worth it for you're trading once you've settled in and like you're do the math on the commissions and stuff. It's definitely worth it if you're doing it super long term. But trade on it for like a year and then decide after that. But like you definitely don't have to buy it. All it does is it essentially just reduces your commissions per trade. And for me, doing something like a strategy like mine, if you're trading 1 to 2 trades a day, commissions are not that big of a deal. I think for one of my trades, if I'm entering in a trade like this and I trade 4 contracts, I think to open and close, that could be something like $10. And $10 is kind of a lot of money to do a trade, but if you consider it in the fact that I'm risking $1,400 and potentially making $3,000 to $4,000, it's nothing, right? It's just the cost of doing business. Now, if you're trading something like you're scalping and you're taking, like 10 contracts and your risk is the same and you're trading like 5-10 times a day, that completely changes how how you should be thinking about commissions. I initially did that kind of style, and it just kind of, the commissions eat away at you. You have to be, I think scalping is extremely hard to actually be good at because you have to be right so often. Otherwise, the commissions just gobble your profits alive. Definitely, like, I feel like my bias a little bit is turning to the bullish side. But again, I think it gotta wait and see. You know, Nasdaq here is really just having an opening chop. We might just go into a some kind of wedge or something right now. Um, and then trying to just clean up my charts a little here. I think this trend line on the Nasdaq, we'll see how it comes down to test this. And then the ES, kind of similar. We broke out of this. Little opening push higher, but that could be it. You know, that could be it where the market's like, ah, that's good enough. I'm gonna sell off. Actually, looking at this, kind of surprised I missed this. The ES has actually come up to these lows. Nasdaq is definitely past that, but that's definitely a good spot where it made a on Friday kind of a triple bottom, and it's coming up to test that, and that might push us lower. So right now it's like I've got all these levels and lines, and I'm trying to just see based on all those, what is the market really, how is it acting this morning? You know, a new week, even though the market's been in a very different, methodical, consistently moving up trend. Um, Definitely kind of this spike higher we had was it getting really excited. You know, we had this clean, methodical move up, you know, move, chop, move, chop, move, chop. And then we just moved and then reversed. And so that can get people a little worried. Is this got people too excited? And then this is, you know, news came in of, okay, not everything's all hunky dory in the Middle East. And so we could be starting I think the trend is I think this trend is over at this point. Now the question is, what is the trend now? It doesn't necessarily mean if that uptrend is over, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to start going in a downtrend. It could be we're just in sideways chop for a while at the highs, which will still produce good shorts. And I want to see, I definitely think I'm interested in taking a short here. This was, I think, too early. Because this still seems like it could just, you know, it's still in an uptrend here, big picture. And I don't want to get in the way of that. I want to be patient this morning on a Monday. You know, we have all week. I want to really see, okay, because we're in this spot where this major trend is changing, that makes it harder to predict what the market might do until we kind of understand what the next trend is. That's crazy that my micro contracts take 5,000 trades to basically break even. I wonder if that is that though, both sides, because it costs 9 to sell or 9 to buy and 9 to sell. So it might be 18 cents round trip as it's called. I don't remember the exact fee structure. Also might look for a buy down here, depending on, you know, kind of how we pull back here. There's not really a good this kind of movement is kind of sloppy, so it's not, there's no good levels until we sell off all the way down here, if you ask me. We're at like the high, so I think it's better to be looking for a short and to see if this kind of move up fails. But at the moment, that's not really showing. There's not enough, I think, and not enough. I'd be more aggressive potentially if there was an unhealthy move and a gap to the upside here. But because we're almost working to fill this gap, that's kind of what I'm looking at. So we're just kind of seeing if we chop a little bit. NASDAQ looks like it's kind of at the lows here. I think the question is, okay, is this bounce here going to fail? And if this bounce fails, the S&P will probably fail and continue lower too. Yeah, so looking at oil too, I haven't talked about it in a few minutes. Oil is definitely in a downtrend, which is putting upwards pressure on the market. They're very correlated these days because of all the news. Looking at kind of a 5-minute chart on oil here, just to kind of see where's the actual structure. So oil, oil had a big gap up, completely opposite of the market. I would think it would fill this. I think this gives more upside to the market if it looks like this is going to fill. And also we had a big move down here, which leaves even more of a gap in this area that this is likely to just continue lower. There's kind of this support low here kind of lines up with this. Looking at even bigger picture, we pretty much have kind of this downtrend going on. Looking at a 5-minute again. Actually, let's go to a 1-minute, kind of see what the current trend is. I mean, to me, on oil on a 1-minute here, I think we'll just watch this for a while too. It's kind of deciding, I think, if it wants to continue lower. And I think big picture, there's definitely a good possibility of that happening. So I think we'll just watch to see if it breaks this low. If it does, I think that will for sure continue the market to the upside. But right now we're just in chop. The NASDAQ here is, kind of in a wedge like this, and it's basically come down to the pre-market high here, and it's looking to bounce. I don't know if it will. The ES is looking pretty bullish. It's basically come and tested this again. And this might be a spot where we just start our uptrend for the day. We are 16 minutes into the market open, so definitely starting to get in a spot where I think there's enough price movement to start getting a read on the market. I think it's still a little choppy though. I definitely want to be open-minded for long. If it, I think it makes one more good spike lower, and that clearly traps and fakes people out, I think that would be a potential good spot to go long. And here NASDAQ kind of makes a new low and comes back up. That would set up kind of a nice head and shoulders. And so I think I would like that in the sense of just continuing this uptrend and going for the gap on the S&P 500 and potentially looking for all-time highs, just because that's what it seems like the market's doing today. And I don't see, there's nothing really to tell us otherwise. I'm definitely in that headspace of we might be changing, but if the market's not telling me that it's really doing that yet, I want to, maybe default to the thoughts on last week and approaching the market based on how I was last week. And if it's just gonna grind higher, that's okay. I'm not married to chasing this up move because I don't think the potential is for a great trade today is amazing. We could be forming kind of a head and shoulders on the ES here too. NASDAQ actually just made a new low. Kind of got this funky topping pattern here. I don't really, my thought here, like I said a couple minutes ago, I kind of want to see if this turns into a fake lower and it turns into an uptrend, because I don't see a way to enter in short here without feeling like I'm chasing. The highs to short were up here, and we kind of just chopped and reversed off of that. It was too early in the market to do that. I think I'd prefer kind of a little more spike lower and then to see that recover. And if I'm going to get a trade like that, I actually think I don't want to be full size. I think I'll knock down to like 1,000 of risk, just because it's a decent spot to look for something, but it's not crazy good looking. Like on Friday, we had this huge move up pre-market, and it looked like there was huge potential to sell off down to here. We sold off here and then reversed, and then eventually did actually sell it off. When the market's kind of like funky like this, I almost feel like the best way to think about it is wait for one direction to get faked out. And that doesn't always happen. Maybe this just sells off and I watch it sell off. But to me, the better trade is letting it look like it's going to start sell off. People get excited, they get in short, and then it flips on them. Because in the NASDAQ, at least, there's a decent little sell off here to reverse back up to, just the opening price here. NASDAQ is just kind of, or the S&P is just kind of sitting bullish here. And this on the NASDAQ looks like a trap to me. The question is, what does this candlestick do? Does it come down here and then reverse? Or does it reverse a little bit and then push higher and make kind of that head and shoulders? And on the NASDAQ too, I could enter on the NASDAQ if it actually looks a little cleaner. Same thing here, I'd probably drop down to 1,000. The S&P is a little more bullish, but there's also feels like less volatility. It seems like it's easier for the NASDAQ to jump up here. So I actually like this. It did a little pullback there. The ES kind of did the same thing. I really want to see a little bit more of a pullback. I think I'm going to wait. I'm going to try and wait for this candlestick to close. Too big of a spike on the NASDAQ there. Still doesn't mean I can't get in on the S&P. Just because it's choppy, I'm being a little more cautious. I think I'm going to enter in long here on the S&P instead. Granted, of course, I wish I was long here on the NASDAQ, as that's already up money. But I think the big picture is what I'm looking for is this uptrend to come into place now. I'm smaller size, 800. I'm like half size. Essentially, what I'm looking at is we're kind of bouncing off this. And I'm just looking to see this grind higher slowly. If I get 1 or 2x, I'm totally happy with that. On a 5-minute, we've basically come up to the previous lows here. And I think if we were going to sell off here, it would have happened. I think this double top in the market right here looked really good. Now we still have the potential to essentially chop here and nothing happens. But based on essentially what the market's been doing is we've been pretty much grinding higher pretty consistently. And so I definitely want to see on the way up here, I want to see how we react to this close. That's what this first line is. And then I think if we break through that, it opens the door up to the highs. Again, I'm half size because this is definitely more of a smaller trade with less likelihood to work out. We're looking at a 1-minute chart on the SP 500 futures. To go through the checklist a little, since I didn't really talk about that while I was kind of focusing on it. The reversal zone, we're not at a crazy zone. The NASDAQ zone is kind of better. The NASDAQ zone was kind of essentially off of the pre-market highs, and the NASDAQ, I think, bounce looks better, but it kind of spiked and I basically missed it. I was being maybe a little too cautious. Either way, it looks like, the NASDAQ was essentially looking to bottom. And then, so that's kind of the reversal zone. There's not really an unhealthy move this morning. I don't always require that. So that's actually not in this trade. And then this is actually more, there's not really, the trend break was seen essentially, does this look like it's topping? Again, this is more, the confirmation was more on the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ had a good sell-off. And then this reversal to the downside clearly was reversing. And then I essentially saw this bottom and look for it to go higher. So this is a little funkier of a setup. But that's kind of my signal to get in. And I can definitely talk about it more a little bit later. But right now I kind of want to make sure I'm ready to manage this, because how the market has been is we've been in a slow grind higher. And so I don't need to, I'm not looking for a huge trade here. I will use a trailing stop. I'm not going to go for like a fixed limit and just let it close. I will trail my stop depending on how the market moves, most likely. Okay, I don't want to accidentally input more orders. But also, this is a fast move here. On the NASDAQ, we're just going straight up. And the question is, okay, does the NASDAQ come up here and sell off and we just go sideways? if that's the case, I do kind of want to just get out of this. But to me, on the both markets on a 5-minute, this looks pretty bullish, especially the S&P. That's kind of why I wanted to enter in on the S&P 500 more, is even though there was a little bit more of a reversal potential gap here on the NASDAQ, to me, if I'm looking for kind of the more big picture, this swing up on the S&P 500 looks really good. And so I like that more. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at. And so I think because we're just in a slow methodical move up, I got to be patient and let that slow methodical move continue. Now we got a little overexcited here, so most likely we pull back. And I would think we pull back, and I'll just move this a little bit. And I think we pull back and essentially retest these highs right here. That would make sense in a healthy move. And the NASDAQ here got a little overexcited. It's definitely likely that it pulls back a little bit. But I also don't want to give it all the way down to here room. I think if we start to pull back, I'll give it a couple candlesticks, see how things play out. Obviously hope that it doesn't, if it just rips lower, so be it. I'm gonna roll my eyes and move on with my day. But I want to give it some room here to have a healthy pullback. Maybe the NASDAQ comes down to here and continues higher. So gotta hold through a little bit of a pullback here to allow it to have more upside. I don't want to just take it off here yet or trail my stop off up too tight yet, because I think going break even right now would feel really good, taking that risk off the table. But I think there's potential to come back a little bit further than break even and go higher. And I think right now the risk is that we do a little fail breakout here and actually go to the downside. So definitely still, I'm not married to this trade. I'm happy to get out at a small loss if that's what it takes. But I want to see how this pullback, this is the pullback that I want to see. And I want to see, okay, this pulling up, I actually am okay moving up to break even after that little candlestick move. Reading into that movement, it's basically, you can see it's basically bounced perfectly off of this previous high. So to me, I want to see the uptrend continue. But if this comes up, bounces, and then actually starts to sell off, I think because the market's choppy and can go either direction, I think it opens up the door to continue lower. And so I'm okay getting out. Because I think if this is going to continue higher, it's not going to sell off a crazy amount. My control key is getting locked, and I'm almost putting in orders. Hopefully all that makes sense. Yeah, just kind of waiting to see how this plays out right now. I would love to try and get 2x on the trade. I think once we get up there, I'll probably tighten my stop loss up. But again, it totally depends. Looking at oil here, because this is definitely... Oil is looking kind of just choppy here and almost maybe a little bullish, which is not good for the market to go up. We want oil to start selling off. And so right now, I think it's at kind of a decision point. So if, it's kind of 50-50 right now, right? If we go up, I make money. And if we go down, I don't lose any money. And I'm totally happy with that. This definitely looks, I think this looks like it's going to just rip this move back lower to some point. And so that's why I'm okay holding and being a little tighter, because I think the read's a little all over the place. And I want to be in the market if it's going to be easy and get out when the signal is just not great. Now, it totally could come down here, bounce, and continue higher. But here's kind of another bottom attempt. Essentially, the NASDAQ is coming out and testing this area. And that's where I would want it to bounce if it's going to bounce. And if it breaks that, I think the trade doesn't look good. Oil's kind of making a new high here. It's attempting to go higher. So Yeah, we're out of the trade on break even. Totally could spike this and continue higher. But I didn't feel like it was super worth it risking money on once I was in that thing. Just because it's a little more choppier than I would like to be in the trade. I think if the trend was going to do what I wanted to do, but maybe it stops me out like my trade last week. Maybe it stops me out by like a couple ticks here in reverses, which would be a big bummer. Because there's another kind of spike and a bottom attempt. And that's the hard part about having having a tighter stop, is sometimes you stop yourself out. But I think there's times where it makes sense to have a tight stop, like I think right now, and times where it's okay to have a wider stop. But because of my read going into today, it's definitely kind of a little wish-washy back and forth. I think having a tighter stop was better. I think it was, I want to be in this move if it's going easy, and I want to just get out if it doesn't look good. The NASDAQ here has pretty much done what I thought in terms of, well, if it's just going to be choppy, I don't want to be in this. Yes, I did close out to put it on the screen. I pretty much closed out at break even. I wanted to see this bottom and continue higher in a better way. Now we could still be bottoming here off of this, and my stop could have been too tight. But I was really reading off the NASDAQ, and the NASDAQ broke the support I wanted to hold. I think it's just a little too choppy. But I'm happy with how I played it. I'm happy that I saw this potential and jumped in on it. I was wanting to try and take some smaller stabs in the market when I saw potential, and I think that was definitely a good spot to get long if the market was going to continue higher. But I think we're kind of at this inflection point. Oil looks like it might start to break higher here, which would put more downwards pressure on the market. And so, things are really just chopping here. They're not really doing, and thinking about the flip side now, oh, well, why not go short now? I don't think there's good potential there either. I think this is either going to chop and slowly grind higher, and it might just do this. I just think it's the trade. That was the trade I'd like to take today, and I don't think it's going to be easy enough. And so that's kind of, like last week, like I entered in a trade and the bias was right. And maybe my stop was a little too tight, but it's, trying to execute and then adjust things. I think I'm just going to watch things for a couple more minutes. Let me know if you guys have any questions on that trade, or just anything I've talked about in general. Again, if you're kind of new to things, I do have a ton of videos on my channel that kind of go into a lot more detail on this strategy. We definitely might get a little bounce here because the NASDAQ is at the lows again. But big picture, this isn't a good sign for clean movement in one direction, which is what I was more looking for. We might get a little bounce here, which hurts to watch being out of the trade. but I don't think at this point it's going to do something that I was actually looking for. I mainly just look for the one strategy. To me, focusing on kind of one strategy made it way easier to actually be disciplined and execute the strategy profitably and consistently, because there's so many variables in trading, there's so many indicators, and if you try and do multiple strategies at once, it just adds more variables, and adding more variables just makes it harder to trade successfully. It's almost like trying to make it so stupid simple that you can actually execute, because it's not, trading isn't complicated because of the patterns or the strategy you have to do. It's complicated because the emotions of you that affect your trading, and so you have to learn how to deal with those. The biggest thing that stops people from trading, there's kind of two things. Is one is jumping from strategy to strategy and just trying to add more and more things because you think more knowledge is going to make you better, which logically for everything else in this world that makes sense. But with trading, that doesn't actually do you any good. And so you have to commit to one strategy, and then after that, you have to realize you're the problem. You are the reason why you can't effectively execute the strategy, because you FOMO into spots where you shouldn't. You can't be patient when the market doesn't fit your strategy. Um, you get greedy. All this stuff comes in and affects your trading, and learning to deal with those and read and go on the read that you have is a very hard part about trading. For me right here, entering this trade, I was a little nervous and didn't have, um, I was a little nervous about entering the trade because my read what felt a little wishy-washy. But to help with that, I went half size, and so that reduces the intensity and the emotions. Because if I take a loss, it doesn't hurt as much. And if I take if I get a win, sure, I make less money, but it's still money in the bank. And so, and then, so that's just the emotions to get in, and learning to jump in based on those emotions. And, even though you feel nervousness, I always feel nervousness for every trade because it's an unknown, right? And I'm risking a lot of money because I'm always sizing up once I'm comfortable at the size I'm at. And then from there, it's once you're in the trade, is also depending on how you manage. I think when you start trading, you should try and have much more of a strict management style of, I'm going to set my limit order at 2x and I'm not going to move it at all until the market, maybe once the market hits 1x, you move your stop loss to break even. Like, that's a very simple rule-based thing that you can't break. But for me now, because I've become comfortable and I can control my emotions more, I have a very fluid management style based on what I see in the market, right? And so here I saw it break out. I saw the NASDAQ here have a big move up, pretty much testing the highs here to where a spot where I'm like, okay, if the market's gonna reverse and just be choppy, this is where that's gonna happen. I don't know that's gonna happen. This could be a start of a good move to the upside, and we might just have a little pullback. So that doesn't mean I'm just gonna necessarily close out here, but I want to give it a little bit of room to pull back. And the hard part is, okay, what is an okay pullback to allow, right? And so for me, I thought that, you might have to go back in the recording a little bit to really see this in real time, but the NASDAQ was pulling back down to here to this support line. And I thought, okay, if it doesn't bounce here, I want to get out. And that allowed me to, it tried to bounce. And so I put my stop loss here at break even when I was in the trade, and the market knocked me out. And I was okay with that because to me, it had violated enough of a signal that if this is going to continue higher and I'm going to be able to get a decent trade, it needs to be showing me more strength. And if it comes back all the way here and the NASDAQ comes back all the way down here, that is showing you more volatility, right? It's not actually showing you strength in an uptrend. It's actually showing you that it popped up here and it's selling back. And that's showing you just a choppy, volatile range. And that's not kind of what I want to look for in a trade. I was looking to see if we were going to continue this uptrend. And I wanted to capture that if that happened. And if it doesn't, I'm totally happy getting out at break even. And if it's just going to chop, I don't want to trade in that either, because that's really hard to trade in. You know, and it would have been easy to get married to the trade here and be like, oh, why don't I just give it a little bit more room? Why don't I just give it a little bit more room? Like if I just left my stop loss down here, I would be in the trade still, but this does not look good. I mean, it does look like it might, you know, I could totally see it coming down to kind of this support line here, and us slowly trending higher. But that is a very big gamble based on how the NASDAQ is acting and how the market is acting. Really, we're just chopping. And oil actually, we were looking at this kind of oil downtrend, and it broke that downtrend. Oil looks like it actually wants to trend higher, which is going to put downwards pressure on the market. And so I think, hindsight now, I think getting out at break even was a great read, but doing that in real time is very hard. I'll get off my my rant there. Hopefully that was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any other questions. We have made a triple bottom here, but I think at this point, a hard part about chop is it's very easy to read into, you know, thinking, oh, there's a triple bottom. But if you just look at the big picture, it's just in a chop range right here. The rectangle boxes are basically support and resistance zones. I have a video on my channel of how I actually draw those. And if you go back in the recording, it'll show you me walking through this morning of how I drew those today. For anyone new, I do live trade pretty much every day now that I'm trading. I'm trying to do 4 to 5 days a week. Pretty much start pre-market and then execute my strategy every day. You have a hard time trading when the market's based on oil. It definitely adds a challenge because it adds, you know, having to look at oil and seeing the correlation definitely adds a challenge. But I think the way to look at it is it almost just adds one more layer. You know, normally I don't look at oil because the market's not that correlated on oil. But because of the Middle East news right now and everything going on, it is very correlated. And so in the sense, you almost want to see, you know, if I want to see an uptrend and I want to take a long, I want to see the confirmation of that on the main chart I'm trading of like the NASDAQ and the S&P 500. But I also need to see the reversal of that on oil. You essentially just need one more confirmation, which makes it hard, you know, as another layer. But I think kind of once you get used to it, it's not too bad. So this tool right here is a custom indicator I've made for NinjaTrader. You can get it in the link in the description. It's custom coded and it only goes for the NinjaTrader desktop. Sadly, I haven't seen it anywhere else. I haven't traded or back tested this strategy pre-market. There's definitely times where it would make sense. But I just like to stick to when the market opens. Pre-market can be a little tricky, and with how futures work, the margin you need to trade pre-market is a lot higher, so your leverage is kind of worse. The software I'm using is called NinjaTrader. You can find a link for it in the description as well. Yeah, it looks like we might start to sell this move. I mean, the NASDAQ looks like it has much more of a chopping pattern. And I think because that long didn't work out, we might start to reverse here. I don't really have I don't really see a way to enter in. The ES hasn't really, it's still kind of in this chop though. And oil could, the thing is, oil could just, there's kind of this support zone that oil had previously here before it broke, and we've tested that. So we could actually be reversing here on oil. I think it remains to be seen if oil is going to break this and continue higher or go down. And I think based on that, this is technically a 1 minute as well. Sorry for the confusion. And then depending on what that does, I think, you know, the market right here, the S&P 500 right here definitely is at a decision point. Is it going to break this or is it going to bounce? And the NASDAQ's being a little more funky this morning, but it's still, I mean, it's still staying in this volatile range. Oh, the higher margin rates are just holding an hour during the close. I think you might be right. I frankly, I don't know, but I think definitely holding during the close has higher. But I thought it was a little bit more for overnight as well. But I'll have to look because they are definitely changing stuff, or you know, I could just be wrong because again, I don't trade pre-market, so frankly, I never really double checked. Just looking at, this is gold on a daily chart. Gold's just been kind of sitting here for a couple weeks, not really doing much. Bitcoin on a daily chart, kind of the same thing. Kind of just, it looks like it might just come up a little bit and then could keep going lower. Silver is pretty much the same thing. Like they had such massive moves. They need time to work this crazy move off. Like almost if you look at the trend in oil before it got ridiculous, if you draw a trend line based on that, if it was more in a healthy trend, it would actually be kind of right here. And so pretty much it's kind of there. That's kind of how I look at those sometimes. Same with gold. Gold doesn't really work as well for that. It kind of just went berserk. I think at this point though, looking at a couple more questions. How much attention do I play to options? Volume. I don't. I think there's so many things you can look at in the market that can help and confirm, but I don't think it necessarily helps because you're always going to find situations where one indicator perfectly shows a trade and confirms a trade. But you can do that for pretty much any indicator or pattern out there. And so it's more about finding, to me, taking all that away and just reading the price action and you know, looking at just the S&P 500, the NASDAQ, and you know, now oil recently a lot more too. I can get what I need from just looking at the price movement based on where the trend is, how it's moving, where it is based on the zones in the big picture. And it simplifies things enough for me. I don't really usually, there can be a spike more midday, but I usually just trade the first 60 minutes. To me, it just allows, you know, that's where a lot of the volatility is, and it allows the market to, or allows me to really get in, get a trade if it happens, and then move on. I don't like trading for very long because as time goes on, I get tired and my decision making gets worse. Is there potential for a short? I think at the moment, I think it's kind of unknown which direction the market's going to go. I think we're still going to go higher, but honestly, we could go either direction once we kind of hit here. I think we could go down or we could go up. It's definitely big picture. The market trend is kind of over. We had this great trend last week, and we might be continuing that, but it's slightly different. Or this could be the start of something bigger to the downside, or it could just be the start of a big sideways flag. I think that just remains to be seen how the rest of the day unfolds and into tomorrow. So I think at that point, I'm going to call it. I don't really see much with the rest of the day. If you're new, I appreciate you being here. And if you've been here before, I really appreciate you being here too. Definitely go check out my channel if you want more tutorials. I have very good polished tutorials there. I will be back tomorrow and the rest of the week streaming, seeing if we can find any trades. I think at this point, I'm getting off because I don't really see anything. I think it's just choppy. So good luck with the rest of the day. I think today is definitely see how the week unfolds so we can see what the rest of the week is like. I think today is a big day to just understand what the market is doing. So have a good rest of your day, guys. I will see you tomorrow.